Hello, fellow humans. In today's video, I will discuss why politicians keep failing to fix climate change and wealth inequality. What does Canada, my country of residence, Romania, my country of birth, and the United States, the top global superpower for the time being, have in common? They all have governments that are stuck in a capitalist mindset. Sure, there are flavors in the style of their approaches, adapted to the size of these three countries, but in essence, all three governments want to continue business as usual, want more economic growth, want more extraction of resources, and do not care about the state of the environment. All these three governments will fail at raising the quality of life for their citizens and will fail to do anything relevant for addressing the climate crisis and all social problems. For today's video, I have looked at two recent unrelated reports: Material Dependencies, Competitiveness, Security, and Social Environmental Issues of Critical Raw Materials, published by the Association for International Affairs, authored by Nina Djukanovic, and the Climate Inequality Report 2025, published by the World Inequality Lab, authored by Lucas Chancel and Cornelia Moren. Both of these reports, taken together, show clearly a connection between property and power, and how the design of capitalism underpins inequalities. Wealthy individuals fuel the climate crisis through their investments, even more than their consumption and lifestyles. At the world level, the top 1% represent 15% of global consumption-based emissions, while they account for 41% of global emissions associated with private capital ownership. Europe used to produce 50% of global minerals in 1900, and in 2008 that dropped to 5%. Meanwhile, China is a global leader in clean energy mineral supply chains for batteries, wind, and solar photovoltaics. What's the connection here? The super rich control most global assets. The quest for wealth accumulation has forced nations in a deeply race for resources. The national security of nations is deeply dependent on the availability of these resources. Europe is losing at the game of securing resources that are needed to maintain its high standard of living compared to poorer countries, and for its own military defense. Clean energy technologies require massive inputs of minerals. For example, both offshore wind and onshore wind power generation require between 3 times and 7 times more copper than traditional coal and natural gas. At the same time, the urgency of phasing out fossil fuels is so high that we have less than 5 years at best to make massive, radical changes on how our economy is designed. Back to the three countries. Romania has a massive budget deficit, which prompted the government to implement austerity measures by cutting expense for public services, but avoiding the taxation of the super wealthy. Canada has passed Bill C-5 that wants to promote clean growth and give government more power to override indigenous sovereignty over land. The United States is doubling down on military expenses, tax cuts for the super rich, and a protectionist trade war. None of these three governments admit the catastrophic reality of the climate crisis and massive inequalities. They promote business as usual because they are on a path dependency, and they operate under pressure from the rich ruling elites to keep business as usual. This is why all the three governments will fail at solving the crisis. They will all burn more fossil fuels while seeking even more economic growth. To keep global warming at 1.5 degrees Celsius, which by many accounts has been breached already, we need an investment of $266 trillion by 2050, compared to $235 trillion, which is the current value of the capital stock. This can never happen even if all countries were governed by the most enlightened and incorruptible politicians, as long as the ownership of capital remained largely in the hands of an elite. As long as capitalism is constructed on a design that links power to property in proportion, the major owners of property that is used as capital for investment will decide the rules of the game. There's nothing any politician can do to overpower these owners of capital unless they eliminate the proportional link between power and property. As if this wasn't enough, the picture between rich and poor countries shows that the richest 20% of countries are the most responsible for climate change. The poorest 40% of countries are in a massive shortage on all important metrics that create a good quality of life: food, health, education, income, work, water, energy, housing, and so on. I argue that the failure of politicians is guaranteed if they do not aim at weakening the forces of capitalism, which I have discussed in a recent video. These forces, proportionality between power and property, dispossession between property and capital, and hierarchies between capital and power, cannot be weakened and phased out by maintaining the status quo, which means that the next electoral cycle in all these countries would have to bring into power politicians that can weaken the force of the owners of capital. How to do this? With degrowth. Degrowth is the only solution to global warming and the climate crisis. I'm choosing my words carefully. If we do not take the idea of planetary limits seriously, we will fail. If we do not take the idea of rationing resources seriously, we will fail. If we do not solve inequality fast, everywhere, we will fail. The capitalist mode of production, which is the dominant mode in which the global economy works, cannot deliver the necessary investments, the $266 trillion by 2050, simply because the owners of capital do not invest in a climate of risk. They want guaranteed revenues and profits. Investing is all about expected returns. A lot of major corporations and banks have simply dropped their commitments to climate investments. The number one priority of high income societies is to slow down their demand for resources, simplify their consumption, and reduce their emissions. The only way to do this is with degrowth policies that start immediately with the super rich by limiting not just their wealth, but also their power. As I mentioned before, putting limits on wealth and democratizing the management of capital would be a good start. As long as politicians in any rich country, regardless if they are right wing or left wing, do not do these two basic requirements, they will fail. This is my prediction. All leftists, socialists, communists of all flavors, all green parties, all environmentalists, all labor unionists, indigenous rights defenders, socially aware entrepreneurs, human rights defenders, social justice activists, all political parties that are not corrupted by private money must support and demand degrowth right now. Admirers of capitalism should learn fast that the capitalist mode of production is not up for the task. It's a very hard lesson to learn, but the most important. Sure, there are many objections and questions that can be raised, and we are not afraid to ask them. How do you preserve the value of investments and savings? How do you motivate people to innovate? How do you pay for social services? How do you reward hard work? Who gets to decide the minimum level of sufficiency and the maximum level of well being? All valid questions. I have answered some of them and I will continue to answer them. I want to be clear that, in my opinion, degrowth is not just one of the many solutions on a wide canvas of alternatives. Degrowth must be integrated in all alternatives. If you are a democratic socialist, you will need to do degrowth. If you are a Green Party politician, you will need to do degrowth. If you are a progressive reformist, you will need to do degrowth. And don't think that degrowth is a negative sounding agenda. It is a specific plan to change the bad habits of a sick economic system. The emergency room in a hospital is not called the Fast Relief Wellness Center. Get used to degrowth fast. Tell others, run for office, force your politicians to act, do something. We have massive crises the destruction of the environment, and huge inequalities. We call these illnesses by their names. We have to talk about both of them. Talking about one problem but not the other is a huge mistake. This is why I put the finger on the root causes: the obsession with economic growth at all costs, and the forces of capitalism. All politicians that do not phase out the wealth and the power of the super rich will fail. Thanks for watching. We'll keep this going until we win. If you enjoyed this video, please click the like and the subscribe buttons, because that's what YouTube wants to show me to other people. Thank you for supporting my research on Patreon and Ko-fi. $5 a month helps a lot. These are the most important years in the history of civilization. Let us replace capitalism with an economy for life. Increase the peace.